He had everything, but he felt like he had no reason to live anymore. She had little time, but she fought for every second. On a cold night on the bridge, their paths crossed. What started as an unexpected encounter turned into a journey that would change their lives forever. Before you discover this emotional story of hope and redemption, don't forget to like and share so more people can be inspired. Night was falling over New York City when Emily finished her shift at the cafe. Her feet ached after 12 hours of serving tables, and her back protested with every movement. She counted the day's tips, $243. It wasn't enough. It never was. With rent overdue and medications becoming increasingly expensive, she had to make impossible choices every month. She tucked the money into her worn bag and put on her thin jacket, inadequate for the cold. October in New York could be cruel, especially for those without the resources to dress properly for the weather. She said goodbye to her colleagues with a tired smile and stepped out into the night. At the pharmacy, Emily stared at her prescription with frustration. The medications totaled almost $800. Even with the discount from the social program, it was far beyond what she could afford. "Just the basics today," she told the clerk, who already knew her story and looked at her with compassion. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor of one of the largest commercial buildings on Fifth Avenue, Richard Miller signed the last documents of the day. At 45, he was the type of man Forbes magazine loved to portray. Successful, powerful, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country. But that night, his eyes didn't reflect success, only a profound emptiness. The divorce. Papers arrived, his secretary informed him, placing a folder on his desk. Richard didn't even bother to open it. He knew what he would find there. The official confirmation that Christine, his wife of 20 years, had chosen his best friend. The double betrayal still burned in his chest. He grabbed his car keys and went down to the garage. The black Porsche, which once gave him so much pleasure, now seemed like just another empty symbol of a crumbling life. He drove aimlessly through the city streets, letting the traffic carry him. Emily was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, her usual shortcut home, when she noticed the luxury car parked strangely. Something about the way the driver was hunched over the steering wheel made her stop. Years working as a waitress had given her a sixth sense for people in moments of desperation. She approached cautiously. The man inside the car had his eyes fixed on the horizon, hands gripping the steering, wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. She tapped gently on the window. Richard lowered the window automatically, more out of reflex than willingness. He found a pair of brown eyes observing him with a mixture of concern and determination. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so young. "I'm fine," he replied dryly, expecting her to walk away. But Emily didn't move. "You know," she continued, ignoring his hostility, "I would give anything for more time, but mine is running out." It's funny to see someone who seems to have everything wanting to throw theirs away. The frankness of her statement caught him off guard. For the first time, Richard really looked at her. Young, probably no more than 25, too thin to be healthy, with dark circles that cheap makeup couldn't hide. But there was something in her eyes, a strength, a determination that intrigued him. "You don't know anything about me," he responded, but his voice had lost some of its harshness. "I know that. Car costs more than 5 years of my salary. I know your watch would probably pay for my treatment for a month. And I know you're thinking of doing something irreversible on a night when you should be thankful to be alive." Richard felt as if he'd been slapped. "Treatment?" he asked, his curiosity momentarily overcoming his bitterness. Emily smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's a cafe nearby. It's not a 5-star restaurant, but the coffee is decent. How about we talk for a bit? I promise not to steal too much of your time." Something about the proposal, perhaps the simplicity, perhaps the complete absence of judgment in her voice, made Richard hesitate. For a moment, he was silent, weighing his options. Finally, he turned off the car. "Why are you doing this?" he asked as he got out of the vehicle. "Because someone once did the same for me," she replied simply. "And because no one should be alone on a night like this." They walked in silence to a small cafe on the corner. The place was simple, with formica tables and plastic chairs, but clean and welcoming. Emily ordered 2 coffees, ignoring the curious looks from the staff directed at the man obviously out of place in his Italian suit. "So," she began after the steaming cups were served, "want to tell me what brings a man like you to contemplate the horizon on a bridge on a Tuesday night?" Richard stared at the dark liquid in his cup, surprised to realize he actually wanted to talk. Perhaps it was the lack of expectations in her eyes, or perhaps it was simply the fact that she was a complete stranger, someone who had no connection whatsoever to his complicated life. "My wife is leaving me," he began, his voice low but steady. "For my best friend. 20 years of marriage thrown away for someone I considered a brother." Emily nodded, without offering empty platitudes or unsolicited advice. She just listened as he continued, the words flowing like a dam finally breaking. "The worst part isn't even the betrayal," he admitted after a few minutes. "It's realizing that it means nothing. All the money, all the success, all the achievements. In the end, I'm alone. My son barely speaks to me, preferred to stay with his mother. My friends, well, I discovered they weren't really friends." "And you think that means your life has no value?" she asked softly. Richard looked up, surprised by the insight of the question. "It means I wasted 25 years building something that doesn't matter." Emily took a sip of her coffee before responding. "You know what the difference is between us? You still have time to build something new, something that really matters." There was something in the way she said time that made Richard remember her first statement on the bridge. "You mentioned treatment." A sad smile crossed her face. "Leukemia, diagnosed 8 months ago. The doctors gave me a year, maybe less. I work every day trying to pay for basic medications, but—" She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Richard felt his own personal tragedy diminish in the face of that revelation. "And yet you stopped to talk to a stranger on the bridge. Life is funny, isn't it? Sometimes we find purpose in the most unexpected places." Emily looked at her watch and began to stand up. "I need to go. My shift starts early tomorrow." "Wait," Richard said, surprising himself. "What's your name?" "Emily," she answered, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Emily Santos." "Richard Miller," he introduced himself, extending his hand. When she shook it, he noticed how cold it was. Can I see you again?" Emily seemed to consider for a moment. "I work every day at Cafe Haven on Madison Avenue. If you want to talk, you know where to find me." With a final smile, she turned and walked out into the night, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts and a half-empty cup of coffee. He stayed there for a long time, replaying the conversation in his mind. When he finally returned to his car, the city was already asleep. But for the first time in months, Richard felt something different in his chest. It wasn't exactly hope, but perhaps it was the beginning of one. The next morning, Richard woke up with a different feeling. The emptiness was still there, but something had changed. Emily's words echoed in his mind, especially when he looked at the luxury watch on his wrist. "Would probably pay for my treatment for a month," she had said. During the meeting with shareholders, he found himself daydreaming. While his financial director presented projections and charts, Richard was thinking about the young waitress who had interrupted his dark thoughts the night before. How could someone with so little time have so much strength? "Mr. Miller," his secretary's voice brought him back to reality. "Your son Peter is on the line." Richard felt his heart race. It had been weeks since Peter had called. "You can transfer him, Claire." "Dad," his son's voice sounded distant, formal. "I need to pick up some documents that were left at the office." "Of course," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "When do you want to come by?" "I was thinking of stopping by this afternoon if you won't be there." The implicit request not to see him was like a stab wound. "I'll be in an external meeting," he lied. "Claire will be there to receive you." After hanging up, Richard grabbed his car keys. There was no external meeting at all, but he needed to get out of there. Without thinking too much, he drove to Madison Avenue. Cafe Haven was smaller than he had imagined. Simple tables, basic menu, nothing that would normally attract him. Emily was there, balancing a tray with several cups, her face showing fatigue, but maintaining a gentle smile for the customers. When she saw him, her eyebrows raised in surprise, but she said nothing. She finished serving her table and approached. "I didn't expect to see you so soon," she commented, taking out an order pad. "I didn't expect to come," he admitted, "but here I am. What would you like? What do you recommend?" "For someone used to starred restaurants," she smiled. "Our latte is surprisingly good, and the cheese bread is fresh." "Sounds perfect." As Emily walked away with the order, Richard observed her. Her movements were precise, economical, as if she needed to conserve energy. Still, there was a natural grace in her way of moving. "Here, you go," she returned a few minutes later, placing the cup and plate in front of him. "Anything else?" "Yes," he replied. "What time do you finish?" "Your shift?" Emily studied him for a moment. "Why?" "Because I want to talk, without the pressure of your work." "At 6, she replied after a pause. "But you don't need to." "I'll be here," he gently interrupted her. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Richard cancelled 2 meetings, delegated important decisions, and for the first time in years left the office before 5. At 6 o'clock sharp, he was back at the cafe. Emily appeared 15 minutes later, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose from the pins that held it during work. "You didn't have to wait," she said, sitting across from him. "Yes, I did," he replied. "My son called me today. For the first time in weeks. He asked to pick up some documents at the office, but only if I wasn't there." Emily listened in silence as he continued. "You know what's worse? It wasn't always like this. We were close when he was little. At some point between building an empire and keeping up appearances, I lost him. I lost everything, actually." "It's never too late to win back," she commented softly. "And you?" he asked. "Your family?" "I don't have family," Emily interrupted. "My parents died in an accident when I was 16. I was raised by an aunt who has also passed away. Now it's just me." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "How do you manage?" "To face all this alone, I don't have a choice," she shrugged. "But I've learned that there's always something worth fighting for, even if it's just one more day to see the sun rise." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. "How much does your treatment cost?" Richard asked abruptly. Emily stiffened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's—" "Please," she interrupted him, her voice firm. "Don't do this. You don't know me, you don't owe me anything. Actually, I was the one who intruded on your life last night and prevented me from making a terrible mistake," he completed. "Please let me help." "I can't accept your money," she said softly, "but if you really want to help, there's something you can do." "What?" "Keep me company now and then. Conversations like this, they make me feel normal, not a patient, not a lost cause, just a person." Richard felt something stir in his chest. "I can do that." In the weeks that followed, they established a routine. Richard would appear at the cafe almost every day, sometimes just for a quick coffee, other times waiting for her shift to end so they could talk. Emily would tell him about the peculiar customers, about her interrupted dreams of going to college, for literature, about the books she loved. He would talk about business, about Peter, about his regrets. One of those afternoons, as they walked through Central Park, Emily had a severe dizzy spell. Richard caught her before she fell, feeling how much lighter, more fragile she had become. "I need to sit down for a bit," she murmured, leaning on him. They found a nearby bench. Richard noticed how her hands trembled when she took a pill from her bag. "How long has it been since you had tests done?" he asked softly. "A few weeks," she admitted. "The health insurance, it's complicated." Richard felt a determination growing inside him. He knew she wouldn't accept direct help, but perhaps there was another way. While he watched her slowly regain her color, he began to formulate a plan. What he didn't know was that that afternoon in the park would mark the beginning of a profound transformation in their lives. A transformation that would begin with a simple visit to the human resources department of his company the following morning. That night, lying in her small bed in the modest apartment, Emily also couldn't imagine how her life was about to change. Her last thought before falling asleep was about how Richard's eyes seemed less empty now, as if something was slowly awakening in him. Fate had intertwined their paths in an unexpected way, and both were about to discover that sometimes the greatest changes begin in the most unlikely moments. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office earlier than usual. His mind was occupied with the plan he had begun to formulate the night before. Even before his secretary arrived, he was already in a meeting with the Human Resources Director. "I want to create a special medical assistance program," Richard explained, "for employees with serious or chronic illnesses." The director looked at him with surprise. "Mr. Miller, this is unusual. Our current health plan is quite comprehensive." "It's not enough," Richard insisted. "I want something that covers experimental treatments, high-cost medications, even travel to specialized medical centers if necessary." "This will have a significant cost," the director warned. "Cost is not an issue," Richard responded firmly, "and I want it extended to all employees, including temporary and outsourced ones." The director made notes, quickly, clearly trying to keep up with his boss's sudden change in attitude. "I'll prepare a detailed proposal, but if I may ask, what motivated this decision?" Richard paused for a moment, remembering Emily's face. "Let's say I had a change in perspective recently. Sometimes we forget what really matters." Meanwhile, at Cafe Haven, Emily was starting another day of work. The pain was more intense that morning, but she made an effort to keep a smile on her face as she served customers. "Emily," her manager called mid-morning, "there's a man who wants to talk to you. Said he's from Miller Construction." Confused and a little worried, Emily headed to the indicated table. A middle-aged man wearing a well-cut suit was waiting for her. "Ms. Santos?" He stood up, extending his hand. "I'm Charles Rodriguez from the Human Resources Department at Miller Construction." "Yes, that's me," she replied, shaking his hand hesitantly. "How can I help you?" "Actually, I'm here to help you," he smiled, indicating the chair across from him. "Please, sit down." Emily obeyed, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Richard ignored her request and was trying to help her financially somehow? "Miller Construction is implementing a new medical assistance program," Charles began to explain, "and we're partnering with local businesses to extend these benefits. Cafe Haven is one of our first partners." Emily blinked, surprised. "I don't understand." "It's simple," Charles continued. "All employees here, including you, will have access to a premium health plan that covers specialized treatments and high-cost medications." Emily's heart raced. This seemed too good to be true. "And what's the catch?" "None," Charles smiled. "It's a pilot social responsibility project from the company. All we ask is discretion about the program details for now." Emily nodded slowly, still processing the information. Part of her wanted to refuse, feeling that somehow this was linked to Richard. But another part, the part that fought every day against the disease, knew she couldn't pass up this opportunity. When would this start?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Immediately," Charles replied, handing her an envelope. "Here are all the details and your plan card. It's already active." After Charles left, Emily stood still for a few minutes, holding the envelope as if it were something precious and fragile. Her hands were trembling, but this time it wasn't because of the disease. That afternoon, when Richard appeared for his usual coffee, Emily was waiting for him with a mix of emotions in her gaze. "Do you have something to do with this?" she asked, directly showing the envelope. Richard took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Technically, Miller Construction has something to do with it. It's a new company program." "Richard," she began, but he gently interrupted her. "Emily, I didn't do this out of charity. I did it because I realized I could use my position for something that really matters. You showed me that." She was silent for a moment, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he smiled. "Just use it. Fight. And promise me one thing." "What?" "That you'll let me accompany you on this journey, as a friend." Emily nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. In the weeks that followed, both their lives underwent significant transformations. Emily began a new treatment, more aggressive and promising. The sessions were exhausting, but she found strength in Richard's constant presence, who reorganized his schedule to be by her side whenever possible. Richard, in turn, felt renewed. The medical assistance program was quickly expanded to other partner companies, and he found himself involved in social projects that he had never before considered important. One afternoon, while waiting for Emily to finish a chemotherapy session, Richard received an unexpected message. It was from Peter, his son. "Dad, I heard about the new company program. Can we talk?" With his heart racing, Richard replied immediately, "Of course, son, whenever you want." At that moment, watching Emily come out of the treatment room, pale but smiling, Richard realized that his life had completely changed in a matter of weeks. And it all started with a casual encounter on a bridge. Fate had intertwined their lives in unexpected ways, and now, together, they faced an uncertain future, but one full of possibilities. As he helped Emily into the car, Richard made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, he would be there by her side, facing each challenge, celebrating each victory, living each moment. The journey was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, both were eager to see what tomorrow would bring. The New York autumn was painting the trees in Central Park with shades of red and gold when Richard met Peter on a bench near the lake. The 23-year-old young man seemed nervous, fidgeting with his hands as he watched the ducks swim peacefully. "Hi, son," Richard said softly, sitting down beside him. Peter turned, his eyes meeting his father's. "Hi, Dad, thanks for coming." For a few moments they sat in silence, the weight of months of distance hanging between them. It was Peter who finally broke the silence. "I heard about the new medical assistance program at the company," he began. "It's different from what you used to do." Richard nodded. "A lot has changed in the last few months, Peter." "What happened?" the young man asked, genuinely curious. Richard took a deep breath, carefully choosing his words. "I met someone who made me see life from a different perspective. Someone who is fighting a serious illness, but who has more courage and determination than I've ever had." Peter's eyes widened with surprise. "Are you dating?" Richard laughed softly. "No, nothing like that. Emily is a friend, a very special friend who taught me the value of time and the things that really matter in life." As Richard told Peter about his encounter with Emily on the bridge, about the conversations at the cafe, and how it led him to rethink his priorities, the young man listened attentively. For the first time in years, Peter saw his father not as the successful and distant businessman, but as a vulnerable man, capable of change and growth. "I'm sorry, Dad," Peter said when Richard finished, "for pulling away, for not giving you a chance to explain about everything." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sorry too, son, for having been so absent for so many years, for putting work above you and your mother. Can we try again?" Peter asked hesitantly. "Start over?" "Nothing would make me happier," Richard replied, tears in his eyes. That same day, in another part of the city, Emily was fighting her own battle. The new treatment was promising, but the side effects were brutal. Lying in her bed, she fought against waves of nausea and exhaustion. A soft knock on the door made her open her eyes. To her surprise, it wasn't Richard, but Claire, his secretary. "Miss Emily?" Claire called gently. "Mr. Miller asked me to check if you need anything. He's in an important meeting, but he'll come as soon as he can." Emily felt a wave of gratitude. Even when he couldn't be personally present, Richard found ways to take care of her. "I'm fine, Claire. Thank you for coming," she replied, her voice weak but grateful. Claire entered the room carrying a basket. "I brought some things that might help. Ginger tea for nausea, extra pillows for your comfort, and some books for distraction." As Claire arranged the things, Emily observed her. "Do you do this often? Take care of Mr. Miller's friends?" Claire smiled softly. Actually, this is the first time. Mr. Miller has changed a lot in the last few months. He was always a good boss, but now he seems more human, more connected. Claire's words stayed with Emily long after the secretary left. She thought about how her life had become intertwined with Richard's, how two strangers in moments of desperation had become so important to each other. When Richard arrived later, that night he found Emily asleep, one of the books Claire had brought open on her lap. He sat quietly beside the bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. "Hey," Emily murmured, slowly opening her eyes. "Hey," he replied softly. "How are you feeling?" "Better now," she smiled weakly. "How was your day?" Richard told her about his meeting with Peter, about the hesitant but promising reconciliation. Emily listened attentively, her face lighting up with the news. "I'm so happy for you, Richard," she said, squeezing his hand. "All of this is thanks to you, you know," he replied. "You made me want to be a better person." Emily shook her head. "You've always been a good person, Richard. You just needed to remember that." They were silent for a moment, the weight of everything they had experienced in the last few months hanging between them. "Emily," Richard began hesitantly, "I know. We agreed to just be friends, but I need to tell you something." She looked at him expectant. I'm sure I'm falling in love with you." Emily felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to dive headfirst into this feeling, embrace the chance to love and be loved. But another part, the rational part, reminded her of her reality. "Richard," she began softly, "I feel something for you too, something strong and beautiful. But you know my situation, I can't promise a future." "I'm not asking for promises," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm asking for the present, each day, each moment, whatever time we have." Tears streamed down Emily's face. "Are you sure? This won't be easy." Richard leaned in, gently drying her tears with his thumb. "The most important thing you taught me is that life is too precious to waste on fear. I'm ready to face anything, as long as it's by your side." In that moment, with the soft light of dusk coming through the window, Emily and Richard sealed their commitment with a gentle kiss. It wasn't a guaranteed happy ending, but it was a beginning full of hope and love. As night fell over New York, two formerly lonely souls found comfort in each other, ready to face together the challenges that the future might bring. Winter came to New York, bringing with it not only the cold, but also new challenges for Emily and Richard. Emily's treatment was showing promising results, but the weeks of intensive chemotherapy had taken their toll. She was weaker, and the doctors recommended a break to allow her body to recover. On a particularly cold July morning, Richard arrived at Emily's apartment, carrying a breakfast basket and a determined expression on his face. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing her softly. "I have a surprise for you." Emily, still drowsy, raised an eyebrow. "Surprise? Richard, you know we don't need—" "Shh," he gently interrupted her. "Trust me, you'll like this one." While Emily got ready, Richard prepared breakfast. When she came out of the bedroom, she found the table set with fresh fruit, whole grain bread, and her favorite tea. "So what's the big surprise?" she asked, sitting at the table. Richard smiled, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Remember when you told me about your dream of studying literature?" Emily nodded, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her gaze. "Well, I made some calls," he continued. "New York University is offering an online course in contemporary American literature. And you, my dear, are enrolled." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll try," he replied, holding her hands. "I know you're tired, that some days are harder than others, but I also know how much you love reading, how much literature means to you. I thought this might be a good distraction during your break from treatment." Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. Part of her wanted to refuse, argue that she needed to focus all her energy on recovery. But another part, the part that dreamed of discussing Toni Morrison and Ernest Hemingway, was eager at the possibility. "I'll try," she finally said, a shy smile forming on her lips. The following weeks brought a new routine for the couple. In Chai, The morning, Richard would go to work, now dividing his time between business and the social projects he had initiated. In the afternoon, he would return to Emily's apartment, where they would immerse themselves together in the world of literature. It was during one of these afternoons, while they were discussing a short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, that the doorbell rang. To their surprise, it was Peter at the door. "Son," Richard said, clearly surprised, "what are you doing here?" Peter looked nervous but determined. I wanted to meet Emily, if that's okay, of course." Emily, who had been watching the scene from the living room, slowly stood up. "Of course it's okay, Peter. Please come in." The young man entered hesitantly, his eyes scanning the simple but welcoming apartment before settling on Emily. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, extending his hand. Emily shook it with a warm smile. "The pleasure is mine, Peter. Your father talks a lot about you." The three sat down, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air for a few moments. It was Peter who finally broke it. "I wanted to thank you," he said, looking directly at Emily, "for helping my dad to become my dad again." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. "I didn't do anything, Peter. Your dad has always been a wonderful man. He just needed to remember that." Richard watched the interaction between his son and the woman he loved with a full heart. In that moment, he felt that he was finally on the right path, that the pieces of his life were fitting together in a way he never imagined possible. The afternoon passed quickly, with Peter joining the literary discussion. To everyone's surprise, the young man revealed a knowledge and passion for literature that even he didn't know he possessed. When Peter said goodbye, promising to return soon, Emily turned to Richard with a tired but happy smile. "He's an amazing young man, Richard. You must be very proud." Richard hugged her, feeling how much she had lost weight in the last few weeks. "I am. Of all three of us." That night, while Emily slept, Richard stayed awake, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The reality of her situation sometimes hit him like a punch to the stomach. Despite the improvements, the doctors were still cautious in their prognoses. But there, in that moment, seeing her sleep peacefully after a day full of laughter and intellectual discussions, Richard made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, he would ensure that each day was lived fully, that each moment was filled with love and meaning. The literature course was bringing back the sparkle to Emily's eyes, and the reconciliation with Peter was healing old wounds in his own heart. For the first time in a long time, Richard felt truly alive and grateful. As the city slept outside, inside that small apartment, love, hope, and literature intertwined, creating a rich and complex tapestry of life. And although the future remained uncertain, the present was a precious gift that both were determined to make the most of. Spring came to New York, bringing with it not only the blooming of flowers, but also an unexpected turn in Emily and Richard's lives. The experimental treatment was showing surprising results, and the doctors, previously cautious, now spoke of remission with contained optimism. On a sunny September afternoon, Emily left the doctor's office with tears in her eyes and a radiant smile on her face. Richard, who was anxiously waiting in the waiting room, felt his heart race when he saw her. "So?" he asked, barely able to contain the expectation in his voice. Emily simply hugged him, burying her face in his chest. "It's working, Richard," she whispered. "The tests, they show a significant reduction in the cancer." Richard held her tightly, feeling his own tears begin to fall. For a moment, they stood there, in the middle of the waiting room, embracing, letting the wave of relief and hope envelop them. When they finally separated, Richard held Emily's face between his hands. "This deserves a celebration," he said, his eyes shining. "What do you want to do?" Emily thought for a moment, a mischievous smile forming on her lips. "Actually, I have an idea, but it will require a bit of planning." 2 weeks later, Emily and Richard were in a small plane flying over the coast of New York. Peter, who had become a constant presence in the couple's life, accompanied them. "I can't believe you convinced me to do this," Peter said, his voice betraying a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Emily laughed, the melodious sound of her laughter filling the small cabin. "Living is taking risks, Peter. Your father taught me that." Richard looked at her with love. "I think it was you who taught me that, my love." The skydiving instructor interrupted the moment, announcing it was time. One by one, they positioned themselves at the door of the plane. Emily was the first to jump, her cry of joy echoing in the air as she launched herself into the void. Richard followed her, his heart beating fast not from fear but from pure emotion. As he fell in freefall, he thought about how his life had completely changed in such a short time. Less than a year ago, he was on a bridge, contemplating the end. Now, he was literally flying, full of life and love. Peter was the last to jump, his initial hesitation giving way to an explosion of adrenaline and excitement. When the three landed on the beach, they were laughing, whimpering, and hugging, a chaotic mixture of emotions and sand. "That was incredible," Peter exclaimed, his eyes shining in a way Richard hadn't seen since he was a child. Emily, still breathless, looked at father and son with a radiant smile. "Thank you for doing this with me. It was something I always wanted to do, but never had the courage." Richard hugged her, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "You are the bravest person I know, Emily. You face death every day with a smile on your face." "No," she replied, looking into his eyes. "I face life. And now, thanks to you two, I have so much more to live for." That night, as they dined at a small seaside restaurant, Peter surprised everyone with an announcement. "I've decided to change my major in college," he said, his voice mixing nervousness and determination. "I'm transferring to literature." Richard almost choked on his wine. "Literature? But what about business administration?" Peter shrugged. "I realized it wasn't what I really wanted. The discussions we've had about literature, they awakened something in me. I want to explore that." Emily smiled, extending her hand to squeeze Peter's. "I'm proud of you for following your heart." Richard looked from his son to Emily, feeling a wave of emotion pass through him. "I am too, son. If that's what you want, you have all my support." The rest of the evening was spent in animated conversations about books, dreams, and plans for the future. While watching Emily and Peter heatedly discussing Ernest Hemingway, Richard felt a deep gratitude. Life had given him a second chance, not only with Emily but also with his son. Back in New York, the routine adjusted to the new reality. Emily continued her treatment, but now with more energy and optimism. She decided to transform her experience into a book, narrating her journey from diagnosis to the hope of a cure. Richard, inspired by Emily's courage and Peter's decision, began to rethink his own priorities. He initiated a restructuring process in his company, focusing more on sustainable and socially responsible projects. One afternoon, while working in his home office, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Christine, his ex-wife. "Richard," she said, her voice hesitant, I heard about Emily and about the changes you've been making. I wanted to say I'm happy for you." Richard was silent for a moment, surprised by the call. "Thank you, Christine. That means a lot." "Peter told me about changing his major," she continued. "He seems so excited. You've done a good job with him." "We both did," Richard gently corrected. "He's a great young man." When he hung up the phone, Richard felt light. Forgiveness, he realized, was a gift not just for the other person but for oneself. That night, lying beside Emily, Richard reflected on how life could change in an instant. A casual encounter on a bridge had transformed into the love of his life. A terrible disease had become a catalyst for positive changes. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked sleepily, snuggling closer to him. "About how grateful I am," he replied, kissing her softly. "For you, for this second chance, for everything." Emily smiled, her eyes closing. "I'm grateful too, for each day, each moment." As Emily fell asleep in his arms, Richard made a silent promise to himself. No matter what the future brought, he would live each day fully, love deeply, and never again take life for granted. Outside, the city continued its frenetic rhythm, but there in that room, time seemed to pause, allowing two hearts to beat in unison, celebrating the simple miracle of being alive and together. Summer arrived in New York with unusual intensity, bringing with it not only scorching heat, but also a wave of changes in Emily and Richard's lives. Emily's book manuscript was almost complete, her words capturing with beauty and raw honesty the journey she had traveled in the last few months. On a particularly hot January afternoon, Emily was sitting on the balcony of the apartment she now shared with Richard, rereading the last pages of her manuscript. Richard arrived from work, carrying a thick folder under his arm and a mysterious smile on his face. "Hi, love," he said, kissing her softly. "How's the book coming along?" Emily sighed, closing the laptop. "Almost finished, but I still don't know if I have the courage to show it to anyone." Richard sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Emily, your words are powerful. They will touch many lives, just as you touched mine." She smiled, grateful for the constant support. It was then that she noticed the folder Richard had brought. "What's that?" Richard's smile widened. "Remember that idea we had a few weeks ago? About expanding the medical assistance program?" Emily nodded, curious. "Well," he continued, opening the folder, "I've spent the last few weeks working on this. I have here a plan to create a foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping people with serious illnesses who can't afford treatments." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she leafed through the documents. Charts, financial projections, action plans, all meticulously elaborated. "Richard, this is incredible," she whispered. "And there's more," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I want you to be the director of the foundation." Emily looked at him, shocked. "Me? But I don't have experience in administration. You have something much more valuable," Richard gently interrupted her. "Life experience, empathy, a unique perspective on what these people are going through. Besides," he smiled, "you'll have an entire team to help you with the administrative part." Emily was silent for a moment, absorbing everything. Finally, she threw herself into Richard's arms, tears of joy running down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." In the weeks that followed, life became a whirlwind of activities. While Emily finalized her book and prepared to take over the direction of the foundation, Richard reorganized his company to give more attention to the social project. Peter, now fully immersed in his new literature course, offered to be the first reader of Emily's manuscript. One night he appeared at his father's apartment, his eyes red and his face marked by tears. "It's amazing," he told Emily, hugging her. "Mom needs to read this." The mention of Christine caught everyone by surprise. Since the call a few months ago, there had been no more contact between the ex-spouses. "You think so?" Emily asked hesitantly. Peter nodded emphatically. "I'm sure. Actually, I've already talked to her about you two, about everything that happened. She wants to meet you, Emily." Richard and Emily exchanged surprised looks. "Well," Emily finally said, "if she wants to, I'd be happy to meet her." The meeting happened a week later at a neutral cafe in downtown. Christine arrived first, her tense posture revealing her nervousness. When Emily and Richard entered, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. It was Emily who broke the ice. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Christine," she said, extending her hand. Christine shook it, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you for wanting to meet me. I know the situation is unusual." As the conversation flowed, the initial tension began to dissipate. Christine listened attentively as Emily talked about her illness, about how she met Richard, about the plans for the foundation. "You changed him," Christine finally said, looking at Richard. "For the better. Thank you for that." Richard, who had remained silent during most of the meeting, finally spoke. "We've both changed, Chris, and I think it was for the better for all of us." When they said goodbye, there was a sense of peace, of circles closing and new ones beginning. That night, lying in bed, Emily turned to Richard. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "About the book, about the foundation. What if I'm not good enough?" Richard pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You're already more than good enough. You're extraordinary, Emily, and do you know why?" She shook her head, waiting for him to continue. "Because you didn't just survive, you flourished. You took something terrible and turned it into something beautiful. You taught me to live again. You brought my family closer together. You're about to help countless people with your book and with the foundation." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "We did this together," she whispered. "Yes," Richard agreed, "and we'll continue to do so, together." As they fell asleep, Emily thought about how surprising life could be. A year ago, she was alone, fighting a terrible disease, counting pennies to buy medicine. Now, she was about to launch a book, direct a foundation, and most importantly, she was surrounded by love. The future was still uncertain, it always would be. But now that uncertainty didn't bring fear, only expectation. Each new day was a blank page, waiting to be filled with love, hope, and infinite possibilities. And so, embraced by the man she loved, Emily fell asleep, eager to see what the next chapter of her life would bring. The following spring brought with it not only the blooming of flowers, but also the realization of long-cherished dreams. Emily's book, titled Pages of a Survivor, was launched on a rainy September night in a small bookstore in the heart of New York. The space was packed. Friends, family, colleagues from the literature course, and even some of the doctors and nurses who had cared for Emily during her treatment attended. At the center of it all, Emily was radiant, her eyes shining with a mixture of nervousness and pride. Richard was by her side, firmly holding her hand. Peter, now a confident young man in his second year of literature, was in the front row, next to Christine. The family scene, once unthinkable, now seemed natural, as if the pieces of a complex puzzle had finally fit together. When it came time for Emily to speak, silence fell over the audience. She took a deep breath, looked to Richard for encouragement, and began. 2 years ago, I was just another statistic, a young woman with a terrible diagnosis and no resources to fight. Today, I am here, not just as a survivor, but as someone who discovered the true meaning of living. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. This book is not just my story. It's the story of everyone who has ever felt alone, desperate, on the edge of the abyss. It's a reminder that love, hope, and human kindness can flourish in the most unlikely places. As Emily spoke, Richard observed the audience. He saw tears in the eyes of strangers, smiles of recognition, expressions of admiration. His heart filled with pride and love. After reading an excerpt from the book, came the book signing session. A line formed, and Emily dedicated a special moment to each person who approached. Some shared their own stories of struggle. Others simply thanked her for the inspiration. At the end of the night, when the bookstore was almost empty, Christine approached Emily with her copy of the book. "You are an incredible woman, Emily," she said, her voice laden with emotion. "Thank you for bringing light back into Richard's life and Peter's." The two women embraced, a gesture that symbolized not just acceptance, but a new beginning for the entire family. In the weeks following the launch, Pages of a Survivor became an unexpected phenomenon. Literary critics praised Emily's honest and moving prose, and readers from across the country sent letters and emails sharing how the book had touched their lives. Parallel to the book's success, the New Horizons Foundation, created by Richard and directed by Emily, was beginning to take shape. The first pilot project, a comprehensive assistance program for low-income cancer patients, was launched in 3 New York hospitals. One afternoon, while Emily was at the foundation office, analyzing reports and planning the next steps, Richard entered with an envelope in his hands and an enigmatic expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, intrigued. Richard sat across from her, placing the envelope on the desk. "Remember when you told me about your dream of visiting Paris, of seeing the Eiffel Tower, walking along the Seine?" Emily nodded, a smile forming on her lips, as she remembered the conversations they had during the long treatment nights. "Well," Richard continued, pushing the envelope towards her, "I think it's time we fulfilled that dream." With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope. Inside were plane tickets to Paris, hotel reservations, museum tickets, and even a reservation for a dinner at the Eiffel Tower. "Richard," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "That's not all," he said, his voice soft. "I've planned a trip across Europe. Paris, Rome, Venice, Barcelona, All the places you've always wanted to visit. Emily stood up, going around the desk to hug him tightly. "Thank you," she murmured against his chest. "For everything." Richard held her firmly, feeling the warmth of her body, the solidity of her presence. Sometimes he still had to pinch himself to believe that all of this was real, that he had found so much love and purpose when he least expected it. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling away slightly to look into her eyes. Emily raised, an eyebrow curious. Richard knelt down, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. Emily's heart raced when she realized what was happening. "Emily Santos," Richard began, his voice trembling slightly. "You taught me to live again. You showed me the true meaning of courage, of love, of perseverance. You transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible." He opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring. "Would you do me the honor of marrying me?" For a moment, Emily was speechless, tears freely streaming down her face. Then, with a sob that was half laughter, half cry, she answered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Richard slid the ring onto her finger before standing up and enveloping her in a tight embrace. They stayed like that for a long time, gently swaying, lost in their own bubble of happiness. When they finally separated, Emily looked at the ring on her finger, then at the travel plans on the desk, and finally at the man in front of her. "You?" "No," she said, smiling through the tears. "When I received my diagnosis, I thought my story was ending. Little did I know it was just the beginning." Richard softly kissed her forehead. "And what a wonderful story we're writing together." That night, as they walked hand in hand through the park near home, Emily and Richard talked about the future, about the trip they would make, about the wedding they planned, about the dreams they still wanted to realize. The full moon shone in the sky, illuminating their smiling faces. And although the future was still uncertain, it always would be, they knew they would face any challenge together, with love, courage, and the certainty that each day was a precious gift to be lived fully. Autumn in Paris painted the streets with golden and red hues, creating a fairy tale setting for Emily and Richard. After months of planning and anticipation, they were finally realizing the much-dreamed trip through Europe. Walking hand in hand along the banks of the Seine River, Emily paused for a moment, her teary eyes fixed on the Eiffel Tower rising majestically against the pink evening sky. "I still can't believe we're really here," she whispered, squeezing Richard's hand. He pulled her close, softly kissing her forehead. "Believe it, my love. You deserve every moment of this." That night, dining at the Eiffel Tower restaurant with the city of lights shining at their feet, Emily and Richard toasted not just the trip, but the journey that brought them there. "To life," Emily said, raising her glass. "To us," Richard completed, his eyes shining with love and gratitude. The trip continued, taking them from the romantic streets of Paris to the ancient ruins of Rome, from the crystal waters of Venice to the sunny beaches of Barcelona. In each city, each experience, they collected not just souvenirs, but precious memories they would cherish forever. In Florence, as they watched the sun set from Piazzale Michelangelo, Emily received an unexpected call. It was her doctor in the United States. "Mrs. Santos," Dr. Oliver's voice sounded excited on the other end of the line. "I have great news. Your latest tests came in and, well, you're officially in complete remission." Emily felt her legs weaken, and if it weren't for Richard by her side, she would have fallen. Tears of joy and relief freely ran down her face as she listened to the details. When she hung up the phone, she threw herself into Richard's arms, sobbing with happiness. "It's over," she murmured through tears. "It's really over." Richard held her tight, his own tears mixing with hers. There, with the Renaissance city at their feet and the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, they celebrated not just the cure but the rebirth of a life. Back in the United States, the news of Emily's remission was received with joy by everyone. Peter organized a small surprise party, gathering friends and family to celebrate. It was during this celebration that Emily and Richard officially announced the wedding date, exactly 1 year after the day they met on the bridge. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activities. Between the wedding preparations, work at the foundation, and the lectures Emily began giving based on her book, time seemed to fly. One afternoon, while Emily was busy with the final details of her wedding dress, Richard had an important conversation with Peter. "Son," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "I wanted to thank you." Peter looked at him, surprised. "For what, Dad?" "For not giving up on me, for giving me a second chance, for accepting Emily in our lives." Peter smiled, hugging his father. "You did the same for me, Dad. We all deserve second chances." On the eve of the wedding, Emily had a quiet moment with Christine. The two women, who might once have been rivals, now shared a special bond. "You brought light back to this family," Christine said softly. "Thank you for that." Emily smiled, holding the hands of her future husband's ex-wife. "This family gave me a new life. I'm the one who's thankful." The big day finally arrived. The New York sky was exceptionally blue, as if even the weather wanted to celebrate the union. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden, with the city as a backdrop. Emily, radiant in her white dress, walked down the improvised aisle among the flowers, her eyes fixed on Richard, who waited with an emotional smile. Peter stood beside, his father as best man, his eyes shining with pride and happiness. Christine, seated in the front row, smiled through tears. When it came time for the vows, Richard took Emily's hands in his and spoke with a choked voice. "Emily, when we met, I was lost. You not only saved me that night, but continued to save me every day since then. You taught me the true meaning of courage, of unconditional love, of living each moment fully. I promise to spend the rest of my life returning all the love and light you brought to me." Emily, with tears in her eyes, responded, "Richard, you say I saved you. But the truth is, we saved each other. You gave me strength when I was weak, hope when I was desperate, and love when I needed it most. I promise to be by your side at all times, celebrating the joys and facing the challenges together. Our story is proof that love can flourish in the most unexpected places, and I can't wait to continue writing it by your side." When the celebrant declared them husband and wife, the explosion of joy and applause echoed through the garden. The kiss that sealed their union was more than a romantic gesture. It was the promise of a bright future, built on the foundations of love, understanding, and resilience. At the reception that followed, amid laughter, dances, and emotional toasts, Emily and Richard allowed themselves a moment of quietness. Observing their guests, friends, family, colleagues from the foundation, even some of the doctors and nurses who had cared for Emily, they marveled at the journey that had brought them there. "Who would have thought," Emily whispered, nestled in her now husband's arms, "that that night on the bridge would bring us here?" Richard softly kissed her forehead. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, but I'm eternally grateful for this particular surprise." As the night progressed and the stars began to dot the New York sky, Emily and Richard danced slowly, lost in their own world. The future stretched before them, full of promises and possibilities. And although they knew there would be challenges, ahead they were ready to face them, together with love, courage, and the certainty that each day was a precious gift to be lived fully. 5 years had passed since that magical night of the wedding. Time, which once seemed so precarious and uncertain for Emily, now flowed with a sweetness and fullness she had never imagined possible. On a sunny Sunday morning, Emily woke to the sound of childish laughter coming from the garden. She got up, put on a robe, and walked to the balcony, where she found a scene that made her heart overflow with joy. Richard was on the lawn, chasing a little girl with curly hair and bright eyes. Sophia, with her newly turned 3 years, was the embodiment of the love Emily and Richard shared. A miracle that doctors said was unlikely, but that life in its infinite wisdom decided to gift them. "Mommy!" Sophia shouted when she saw Emily running towards her with open arms. Emily picked her up, covering her little face with kisses. Richard approached, enveloping the two in a tight hug. "Good morning, my loves," he said, softly kissing Emily's forehead. As they had breakfast on the balcony, Emily observed her little family with deep gratitude. The life she now lived sometimes seemed like a dream from which she feared waking up. The New Horizons Foundation had grown beyond her most optimistic expectations. What began as a local project in New York now served patients throughout the United States, offering not only medical assistance but also psychological and financial support for families affected by serious illnesses. Emily's book, Pages of a Survivor, was in its 10th edition and had been translated into 12 languages. The lectures she gave, sharing her story of overcoming, inspired thousands of people around the world. Richard, in turn, had completely transformed his company, focusing on sustainable and socially responsible projects. He found a new purpose in using his resources and influence to make a difference in people's lives. Peter, now graduated in literature, was pursuing a master's degree in American literature and had published his first book of short stories dedicated to Emily, the sister that life gave me. Even Christine had found a new path. Inspired by the transformation of her family, she began working as a volunteer at the foundation, finding there a purpose that filled the void she had felt for years. That afternoon, as the family prepared for a special lunch, it was the anniversary of 5 years of Emily's complete remission. The doorbell rang. To everyone's surprise, it was Dr. Oliver, the doctor who had accompanied Emily during her treatment. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a warm smile. "Not at all," Emily replied, inviting him in. "Please join us." During lunch, amid laughter and animated conversations, Dr. Oliver observed the scene with teary eyes. "You know," he said in a moment of pause, "in all my years of medicine, I've never seen a story like yours. It's inspiring." Emily smiled, holding Richard's hand. "It all started with a choice," she said softly. "The choice to live, to love, to believe." Richard nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. "And the choice to give a second chance, to ourselves and to others." As the afternoon progressed, more guests arrived. Peter and his girlfriend, Christine, and her new partner, friends from the foundation, former patients who had become close friends. The garden was soon full of cheerful voices and laughter. In a moment of quiet, Emily moved away a bit, observing the scene before her. Sophia played with other children, her contagious laughter echoing through the air. Richard chatted animatedly with Peter, the pride evident in his eyes. Christine helped serve drinks, perfectly at ease in this new family arrangement. A wave of emotion passed through her. 6 years ago, she was alone in a small apartment, counting coins to buy medicine, with no hope for the future. Now she was surrounded by love, purpose, and infinite possibilities. Richard approached, embracing her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured in her ear. Emily turned in his arms, looking deeply into his eyes. "About how surprising life is," she replied. "About how a single moment can change everything." He smiled, understanding perfectly. "That night on the bridge was just the beginning," she completed. "Each day since then has been a new beginning." At that moment, with the sun setting on the New York horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Emily felt a deep certainty. No matter what the future held, and she knew there would be challenges because life always brings them, she was ready. Ready to live, to love, to face each day with courage and gratitude. Sophia ran up to them, asking to be picked up. As Emily took her in her arms, with Richard by her side, she made a silent promise. A promise to never take life for granted, to always appreciate each moment, each breath, each heartbeat. Because the true magic of life, she had learned, is not in the big moments or extraordinary achievements. It's in the small instances of joy, in the gestures of love, in the courage to start anew each day. And so, surrounded by those she loved, Emily smiled. A smile that carried the wisdom of someone who had faced darkness and found light, who had known despair and discovered hope, who had learned that love in all its forms is the most powerful force in the universe. Night was falling over New York City when Emily finished her shift at the cafe. Her feet ached after 12 hours of serving tables, and her back protested with every movement. She counted the days. Tips, $243. It wasn't enough. It never was. With rent overdue and medications becoming increasingly expensive, she had to make Impossible choices every month. She tucked the money into her worn bag and put on her thin jacket, inadequate for the cold. October in New York could be cruel, especially for those without the resources to dress properly for the weather. She said goodbye to her colleagues with a tired smile and stepped out into the night. At the pharmacy, Emily stared at her prescription with frustration. The medications totaled almost $800. Even with the discount from the social program, it was far beyond what she could afford. "Just the basics today," she told the clerk, who already knew her story and looked at her with compassion. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor of one of the largest commercial buildings on Fifth Avenue, Richard Miller signed the last documents of the day. At 45, he was the type of man Forbes magazine loved to portray: successful, powerful, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country. But that night, his eyes didn't reflect success, only a profound emptiness. The divorce papers arrived, his secretary informed him, placing a folder on his desk. Richard didn't even bother to open it. He knew what he would find there: the official confirmation that Christine, his wife of 20 years, had chosen his best friend. The double betrayal still burned in his chest. He grabbed his car keys and went down to the garage. The black Porsche, which once gave him so much pleasure, now seemed like just another empty symbol of a crumbling life. He drove aimlessly through the city streets, letting the traffic carry him. Emily was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, her usual shortcut home, when she noticed the luxury car parked strangely. Something about the way the driver was hunched over the steering wheel made her stop. Years working as a waitress had given her a sixth sense for people in moments of desperation. She approached cautiously. The man inside the car had his eyes fixed on the horizon, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. She tapped gently on the window.